All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samo?
We've got more Gathering Storm. We're going to do all Egwene chapters today. There is some rand in between, but we're going to be homogeneous on our topic today. So we're going to kind of skip that and come
Yeah,
back to it when we do rand.
it, it seemed like a good idea at the time, but then I kept reading and I was like, oh man, there's still several of these Egwene chapters. Most of the climax of this book is the attack on the White Tower, and it is kind of the culmination of Egwene's storyline. And so I thought, oh, let's just see if we can power through, and then we can spend the last episode of this book all on Rand and what's happening to him here here at the end. Um, so I'm gonna try and as much as possible just push through and focus on the points where that I think matter the most, because what we've kind of talked about leading up to this is Um, and a lot of our gripes with the Sandersons finishing up the series here is, does the payoff land? Does he stick the landing? And because I think Egwene, even if you don't like her as a character, in much the same way that we've talked about when we first started reading these books, we didn't really like Nynaeve. And as we've grown to like her as a character more because we understand her more. And I think the arc that Egwene goes through is one of the best in the whole series. I don't know that Sanderson sticks the landing though, and those are the things that I'm going to be kind of pointing out here as we go.
Well, that not to affect how anybody's reading it here, but this almost seems sacrilegious to say because of how verbose Jordan is. But Sanderson in these chapters, I've noticed, and in kind of this whole book, he uses too many words to say something. It reminds me of that episode of Family Guy where they have the cameras in their house and Peter's sitting there brushing his teeth and he goes, I like to brush my teeth like this, and then I kind of like to do this, and sometimes I just twirl it around because he was so uncomfortable in front of the camera. That's what some of these little sequences reminded me of.
I so I was out for my evening walk thinking about it, and that's when I messaged you of, hey, do we just want to skip these Rand chapters and try and power through the Egwene stuff? And uh as I was thinking about it, and I kind of have more notes than usual, and as we talked about with Jordan's works, I mean, this became very evident, starting with the Great Hunt, especially where they're all apart, and then the storylines converge, and then you see that happening again and again over most of the books, as all these varied storylines kind of come together and reach climaxes together, giggity, or separately. Um, and I was like, it's just not the same here in this book, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And then
Also giggity.
also giggity. And then as I came back and sat down and went back into these chapters, and then it just kind of dawned on me that Sanderson, he, this isn't to crap all over him. He is still an accomplished author, obviously, just if you look at his volume, if nothing else, the amount of work he puts out and the amount of people who buy him and like him. You know, I've said I'm not a big fan of the works of his that I've read, but just based on sales, I didn't like Seinfeld, but obviously a lot of people disagreed with me. Seinfeld and Friends, the two biggest shows of the 90s. I didn't like them. They didn't do it for me, but obviously, objectively, it worked for a lot of people, right?
Uh, I think this might be kind of a social discussion at some point because I'm gonna use pop music as an example. Uh, it's designed to appeal to masses.
Mm-hmm.
Some things are designed to appeal to masses, where some things are designed to make you think. And unfortunately, people don't like to think. They don't like the discomfort of like System of the Down, where he
Hmm.
lulls you to sleep and then hits you hard and then changes everything up and then lulls you to sleep and then hits you hard. Whereas pop is the same beat, repetitive with different lyrics, basically. Every Taylor Swift song sounds the same. I'm sorry.
That is a really good analogy, because even someone like a Taylor Swift, who's the biggest thing right now, well, okay, but then you compare her to a legit artist like the king of pop, Michael Jackson, and you look at his work and how he was always on the cutting edge and everyone else followed him, and whatever pop music was whatever, people just imitating whatever the last Michael Jackson album was. He was actually innovating, and so that's the difference. Is Jordan was actually innovating, and Sanderson does a credible job of copying him, but he's still copying Jordan.
Yeah, and so I'll bring it back to your Seinfeld thing. There's a formula to it. How much difference is there from Seinfeld to Friends? From Friends to The Big Bang Theory?
Mm-hmm.
There's just a slightly different, nuanced. Okay, Seinfeld is these, four people in New York. Friends is this little love tryst that kind of goes on between basically these people passing each other around in this little apartment complex. And Big Bang Theory, they just added the nerd component. Everything else is the same.
Mm-hmm.
They took the exact same thing, added nerd component. And you have this, you have the new show that was the hit, which I liked Big Bang. It was fine, but to me, it was kind of just mindless fun. It,
Well, and beating this horse to death, that analogy works too, because not everyone can follow the formula. That's why sometimes a show comes along, it's trying to follow the formula, but it's not landing the beats, or it's not landing them in the right way. It's like all the pieces are there, but they're just slightly off. So it only lasts a season or two
well,
versus the ones that go on for
and
years.
unfortunately, we live in a day and age where a quality product doesn't matter because
Mm-hmm.
people still buy it. So the formula actually sucks
Yeah.
in the message, and people are just there's no other alternative.
Yeah. And so this is going to jump out here in a few chapters, where it dawned on me as I was reading. I go, oh, he's telling me, he's not showing me. That's why. Because we breeze through the Jordan climaxes, like, the last 5 to 10 chapters of every book we tore through pretty quick, because so much of it was just, there's a lot of action going on here, so there's not much for us to comment on, except it's really cool action, right? He's showing us a lot. Sanderson, he does show us some cool stuff in these chapters, but he's also telling us a lot. And that's where it doesn't land quite as hard. It doesn't hit you quite the same way that Jordan was able to.
Well, and also he has a mismatch between what he ends up doing with the character and
Mm-hmm.
what he's telling you during the time.
Exactly.
Like a great example here is Egwene's thoughts on Rand being in the box and her being in the cell. How it's
Exactly.
so close. Okay, so we have these thoughts. You'd think the interaction would happen differently later.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It was, yeah, that my note on that's on page 586 here. We're in chapter 38, and my first thought was, finally some empathy for Rand. It's just a shame it took the literal situation. That's,
But as soon as she was out of the situation, it all ended.
she kind of forgot about it all.
Yeah.
There's a lot of moments like that. Even before that, right off the bat here, where is it? Sawan is telling her, right at the very beginning of chapter 38, Mother, sometimes you just have to face truth. You can only repair a net so many times before you need to toss the thing aside and weave a new one. And this is, and there are several points here in this chapter and in subsequent chapters where Sawan, to her credit as a, strong character, is not afraid to point to herself and say, hey, over here, remember me? The woman who thought she had it all together, who thought she was in control of everything, and I got stilled and deposed and almost killed, and now look where I'm at. I'm telling you because I know. And my thought here was, so the sunk cost fallacy, the problem with the sunk cost fallacy is, even amongst people who know it and know to be aware of it, is okay, but when do you know you've hit rock bottom? When do you know, oh, okay, now it's time to cut the losses? And and I've mentioned
Yeah,
before,
talk to a gambler.
well, my
Yeah.
an addict.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite comedians right now is Dave Landau, and he's a major component of his bit are his time as an addict and what that was, and the hilarity, being able to look back and laugh on it now. But in the more serious moments, especially when he on his show, he'll one of the things he likes to do is bring in other former addicts and talk about recovery. And one of the things you pick up from listening to addicts talk is their never ending ability to delude themselves, their never ending ability for self delusion. No, no, you haven't hit rock bottom yet. Like, for Landau, one of his stories that he tells is when he knew he had a problem. His friends, they were sitting around a table at a food court in the mall, and he couldn't eat. He was trying to eat a spoonful of rice, and his hand was shaking so bad he couldn't eat. And rather than saying anything, his friends were making fun of him. He just set it down. He walks across the street to a liquor store with his fake ID, buys himself, a little airline bottle of vodka, chugs it, and okay, now he can eat. And he knew he had a problem, but that wasn't rock bottom. That was just kind of that initial recognition of, oh, something's not right here. But for
Well,
years, he kept going down that road.
and from experience, just so people know from that's not like we have stereotypical the way we look at addicts. It's not the person that's missing their job and laying in bed and can't wake up and puking all over the floor and
Mm-hmm.
the stupid depiction we got on Wheel of Time show of Matt's dad. It's not that when you're a real addict. Most of the time you're pretty high functioning.
Mm-hmm.
It's that it hardly ever affects your life. But something like that, where you've just basically messed up, you've been doing it long enough, you messed up the GABA receptors in your brain, that happens within hours.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the DTs from trying to quit. That's just because you woke up in the morning and you haven't had a drink yet. That it gets to that point because you've messed up this system in your brain that inhibits extra movement so that the movement just goes hyper. And it's just like that's not the DTs. People confuse that with the DTs. That's not the DTs. That's just a hyper shaky uh mode because your brain cannot shut off this, or it doesn't have the capacity to inhibit the motion. Uh, but yeah, but you tell yourself, oh well, it sucks. You get to a point where okay, so when you start drinking, you feel bad when you drink. The next morning, you have a hangover or whatever, and then you get to the point where you feel bad when you drink, but then you feel better when you drink again. Now you're on the road. Then you get to a point where you always feel bad unless you drink. And then you're there. The rest is just however many health problems you end up having
Mm-hmm.
after that. Once you're there, you're an addict.
And I think the addict behavior is apt here because the very next page, Egwene is basically saying, no, I'm staying even though I'm in a cell and even though there's the very real possibility that I could be executed. She's basically saying, if I get martyred, it's a win for me. Oh, but wait a minute. Okay, so Elida executes you and that undermines her. But then who's going to be in charge? Who's going to lead the rebels? Who's going to be in charge in the White Tower? Who's going to continue with this effort at reunification that you are so desperate for?
Yeah, but this is where Jordan and in continuation Sanderson is right. History is riddled with positive affection for these people.
Mm-hmm.
Tiger Woods is an example. Everybody wants to be as good as Tiger Woods, but no one's willing to do what it takes to be Tiger Woods because it was at the expense of everything else. The rest of his life was pretty messed up because he was Tiger Woods.
Well,
And,
my
and
point with
Egwene is
Egwene,
doing that in a cell. He was doing that with basically just
yeah.
ignoring all positive parts of his life except golf.
Well, but the problem with Egwene is she's so stubbornly set on her path that um she's not seeing the negative outcomes to what she's saying because she's so set on being righteous that she hasn't even figured out, but are you right? And she gets a lesson here. So a couple pages later, I love this interaction here where Sawan just casually mentions that, oh, Galwin showed up in camp.
Well,
And
I like before that, right before
okay,
that, when she says, "I don't need a reminder," and Swan says, "Don't you?" Sounds like something Elida would say.
eh,
There's your urine
th-
addict
that's a
mistake.
great point because that's the setup, and here's the payoff is, and I'm going to prove it to you because you're not as there as you think you are. Because let me bring up the fact that Godwin's in camp, and then, yeah, pretty good, but not quite because you hesitated a little too long and you did this and you did that. So let me point out in painful detail how I know that I get to you and you didn't cover it as well as you thought you did. And Egwene's response is, let's see, where is it here? Um uh oh yeah.
Maybe I
I
did jump ahead of you. Okay, yeah, I did jump
yeah.
ahead of you. Yeah.
I should think that I should think the time for testing had passed. And so Juan tells her, no, that's life. You're never done. The tests are never over. It's just a new test. That test is done. Now there's another one. And then after that, there's going to be another one. And then there's another one. And that's what, again, Sawan, the mentor, is trying to teach Egwene is that you need to be ready for the unexpected to blindside you. And I just did it. I'm, she's trying to continue to make her point about how Egwene is in more danger than she thinks she is without just without being the dog that won't let go of that bone because she knows that won't work with Egwene because Egwene is every bit as stubborn as Rand is, even though she likes to complain about how stubborn Rand is. And it reminded me of one of my favorite songs from one of the greatest country artists ever, Waylon Jennings, "Where Corn Don't Grow." Travis Tritt has a good version of it too. Um, and there's a line in that song where I was only 17, but I thought that I knew then more than I know now. Because the song opens with his asking his dad, "Don't you ever dream of a life where corn don't grow?" And you know, dad puts down his favorite coffee cup and says, you know, basically the point of the song is the grass ain't always greener. Them weeds are high where corn don't grow.
And there's no food.
Mullet stew. We'll survive, but boy, it'll be gross. um, I will say to her credit though, there is a point. There are a couple points here where um Egwene demonstrates that this is why she has to be the one in charge and where her good qualities are. So like on page 588, she has this thought as she's going through and she's looking around and thinking about the divisions in the tower, and she makes the point that let's see, where is it? Um where the heck did you go? Um It was healthy to have the women planning and preparing. The trouble was when they began to regard others of their kind as enemies rather than just rivals. And this is when you read the founding fathers, Washington especially, when they talk about faction, it wasn't political parties per se. It was factions. It was me versus you, rather than um we are rivals towards the same goal.
with
I'm
different
not your
ideas of
enemy.
how it should be done.
Different ideas about how it should go. The difference between, beating the ever living crap out of each other on a rugby field and then you shake hands and hug it out after the fact versus an actual battle, because those are rivals, they're not enemies. And Egwene is able to see this, is able to articulate, and then is able to put into motion something to do about it. And along those lines, just a couple pages later, there's this. She's also has this thought about how on page 590, the difference between green and blue, it's not just the battle of Ja and green or, you know, horny chicks banging all their warders. Thank you, show. You suck. No, the difference is that the blues are important, but the problem with Sawan, the problem with Moraine, what became their downfall is you can become so fixated that you don't see the forest for the trees. Or there are numerous accounts in World War II of pilots who got target fixated, and they were so fixated on the target they were following and trying to shoot down, they literally flew themselves into the ground or into a mountain. How do
Well,
you not see a mountain? Well, because you're that fixated on the target in front of you.
a good example is Moraine, and she, ultimately, theoretically, grows out of it.
Yep.
But her progressions through book five, her fixation was she had to find the dragon. We get that new spring, we get that eye of the world on. She had to find the dragon. Step one, guide him to the Corinthian cycles. Step two, make sure he's close enough to keep safe, but still learn the ways of the world. Step
Mm-hmm.
four, and that was that. But then she had to realize, oh, I can't just choose a path and make him go down this because the world doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
So it aided her in finding the boy. But once the whirlwind started, it was a hindrance to her
Yeah.
job, and she had to realize that. Now with the greens and horniness and battle, it actually makes sense, and I don't think the show gets it because they're just stupid. But I think Jordan got it. It makes 100% sense that a female with a more masculine libido would also be a female that's more likely to get in a fight. It, it's just it's 100% connected. The two, the high testosterone female, the probably,
Mm-hmm.
remember we talked about the difference in the, what was it, the hypothalamus. You stimulate one spot one way and they get horny. You stimulate it a little harder and they beat people up. It's all connected, and that just makes sense that those would be lumped together.
Yeah. And we actually get that here in a couple of chapters when Sawan bonds Gareth Brine, and you see you start to, that actually is something that is written very well. Um but with it, because most of the time when we've seen that water bond from Jordan, it was with Elaine and Vergidi, and so we were learning about the bond by the way it wasn't supposed to work, because it's not supposed to be a woman and a woman. It's supposed to be a woman and a man, and so it's acting weird with the two of them, and we don't see it firsthand from that point of view like we get with Sawan in that moment. Um, which is probably another place where we'll get canceled if we go down that track, because there's a great, I mean, there is a reason the frickin' Aes Sedai symbol is the yin yang symbol. It's it's basically that Jordan is saying what Sanderson just said there about the having different groups, having a Jaws isn't the problem. It's when you start seeing the different Ajahs as enemies instead of just rivals. And well, same thing with men and women in general. It's okay, yeah, you may be rivals at times. You think differently, but you complement each other because you look at things so very differently. Moving along, I will, to his credit, the last 2 pages of this chapter are just absolutely masterfully written. Now, a lot of that is because Jordan has been teasing us since when did we first meet Varen? The Great Hunt. At the very beginning of the Great Hunt is when we first meet Varen, the absent-minded professor, and that wonderful scene where she accidentally says too much out loud in front of Moiraine and so on. And then from that point, he keeps giving us little hints of what's up with her, what's going on, how much can we trust her, and then all of a sudden, uh, by the way, that dress you're wearing is green. The way she just comes out and says I'm black without saying I'm black is I just told a bald faced lie, and then boom, in chapter. Uh, Great payoff, So that I will say Sanderson stuck that landing. That was a good one. I don't have a ton to say about the next chapter except that it's just a phenomenal read. Um, I think he does a great job of writing Varen. The because she is a bit of a tricky character because she is the absent-minded professor, but she's not. And he does have those, and he doesn't overuse the leans forward and suddenly gets serious and is looking at you with those piercing eyes that, oh, she's not absent-minded at all. And then she goes back to kind of rambling. So he doesn't overuse that. And he really does a good job of letting Egwene be the reader's avatar to play on your emotions because it is a tragic scene. It is an emotional scene. It should be. And he does a very good job of um, playing on the reader's emotions by playing on Egwene's emotions and then also building her character. Um, which, not to get too far ahead of myself, but it's one of the reasons the way she acts around Sawan, especially after her rescue from the tower, is really annoying because she is a much more mature character in this chapter than she is later.
Well, like I
That's why I
said,
feel that's really fumbled.
I think her loss of maturity, even around Swan, was that digression to the ultimate confrontation with
Hmm.
Rand too.
Hmm.
It's yeah, you're right. There are character developing points where Egwene in the Tower is a good story, but that my pissed off part of it, I guess, is that it always digresses back to what it was before that. The progression is there. It's almost like, okay, this happened. Now what do I do with it? Oh, well, let's
Hmm.
make it happen again.
Um, one of the couple of things that jump out right at the beginning of this chapter that are interesting, I think, and we may just kind of put a pin in this and talk about it more next time because this actually has more to do with Rand, which is when Varen says, "He's a fiery one, I must say. I worry about the lad. I'm not certain he understands how the Great Lord works. Not all evil is as obvious as the chosen, the forsaken, as you'd call them." I think that is super duper foreshadowing for Rand in the state he's in and what he's trying to do in this state, and even when he kind of gets past this darkness, what he's still trying to do is deal with the devil, if you will. Um, and so one of the things to kind of ponder that, like I said, I think we'll talk about more when we get to it with Rand because I think it matters more there is this idea that, well, we're not meant to understand God, or you can't understand God's design. And I think I've said before in our Sunday school episodes how much I hate that. And I think that's a great way to just turn people away from Christianity. I think that is a grossly misunderstood and misapplied thought that it's more literal than that. Rand literally can't understand the dark one because the dark one is more of a state of being. He's pure entropy. It is pure chaos. The human mind just literally cannot wrap itself around that thought. Try contemplating infinity. It will hurt your head, right? It's just there are some things when you go up onto the big metaphysical level where you start to go, whoa, this hurts my head. It's it's why Sapolsky and Peterson and some of those guys we reference. It's why we reference them because they have those big brains, but they're able to explain it to normal people, whereas most of the people on that level can't.
Well, and even those biggest brains we have trouble
Yes.
explaining it.
Yeah, and that's there have been times where we've had to go, well, I think what he's saying is this. I think a better way to think about it is that, you know, because you you really have to expand your mind to start thinking about these things that are way outside the realm of normal human interaction and day-to-day life. Um,
Like
the
quantum consciousness.
you know,
Good vibes, baby. Good vibes.
the the other part of that that goes along with that is when Varen is explaining how she ended up in the Black Ajah, uh, you know, Varen being Varen almost by accident because she was following a thread and said, "Oh yeah." I'm basically what we're left to infer is that she was following a thread because it was interesting and stumbled upon the Black Ajah and said, "Oh, good, yeah, I'm totally here to join you. Yeah, that's why I'm here because otherwise she would have been dead." Um, and she took the opportunity to, well, if I'm gonna be here, they're inside us. Why can't I be inside them? Not giggity. Um, and study them from the inside. And this is, you know, this is I think, or I wonder if this is purposeful foreshadowing for Rand, and that's why Varen is here shortly before Rand, which we'll get to next time, because she makes the point of uh Light knows I've done enough to require a very special kind of redemption, but it was worth the cost, worth it indeed. Or perhaps that is simply what I must tell myself. And this is this is one of those thought experiments that aren't always thought experiments because you have people that go undercover in bad organizations, whether it be law enforcement or intelligence or whatever. And that means you're exposed to and sometimes have to do very unsavory things. And how do you live with yourself and how far can you justify for the greater good, you know? And Varen is kind of implying that of I'd like to think that, but I mean, she doesn't come right out and say it, but she's done some very icky things. Um, just even the oath you swear to the Dark One, apparently it's not as simple as the way it is with the oath rod. And the inference I made was it probably involves human sacrifice. My guess would be that there's something along those lines of involving the sacrifice of an innocent to bind you to the Dark One to prove that you're truly on their side.
Well, I was going to bring up cults, but I think actually a better example would be rituals, gang initiation
Mm.
rituals. There's a reason you have to go beat up the old man or kill somebody or depending on which gang you're getting into, right? There's always something gruesome you have to do it, right? You have to commit this act to prove you're in. because once you've gone far enough to commit the act, you have to justify to yourself that it's the right thing to be there.
Hmm.
You see, again, you see that with cults. Usually it starts with donate a little money or do, show up this many times and or bring five more people, like multi-level marketing schemes or it's just it always progresses from just show up to commit this act, and then it gets more and more egregious as time goes on because the more you kind of creep down that hall, the more you have to internally justify all the ones you did before. And then the next one you just creep towards because you've already justified 10 other X. So yeah, she had an oath rod, but the metaphor is still there of
Hmm.
the mental gymnastics you have to play with yourself to say I'm doing the right thing, even though I'm in this gang now. I'm a gangbanger. But they do it at a young age too.
Hmm.
Shoot, I got a 14-year-old. I know how impressionable these kids are. I was 14.
This is a really long time ago, and it's hard to remember, but we were there once.
No,
Last.
well, I think that's part of the difference here is I know exactly the points in my life where I was super vulnerable, and we're really good friends because you happened to be there during one of those times, and there
Mhm.
was there was that was I mean you know the situation. That was a time where I could have gone in the wrong house or the right house, and I chose door A, right?
Mhm.
Or door A chose me, I guess, almost sort of. There's food in the fridge. Come over.
We fed
By the
you.
way, while you're here, build a porch.
There
Okay.
was that too.
Yeah.
Um, Last thing on this chapter, just because it speaks to me personally, is I love the way Varen sums up the brown here. Uh, well, that is inaccurate. If we are distracted, it is because we look forward towards those who will come, and the information, the knowledge we gather, we leave it for them. The other Ajahs worry about making today better. We yearn to make tomorrow better.
Which we had a male parallel, Haired Fell,
Mm,
absent-minded professor, but he was philosophizing about the future. He wasn't, he he brought up history, but in the realm of what does this mean for you later?
hmm. All right. Then the tower gets attacked and everything starts to go haywire. Uh, um, so jumping to chapter 40. Uh, I've already kind of referenced this, but when Brian is trying to talk her out of it, I'm not going with you. The Amarillion gave specific orders, and Sawan says on 620, I thought I could care for myself too, and look where it got me. And now she's not wrong, but she's also not completely right. Same thing with Egwene. That's what makes Jordan's characters good, is because they're real people. Some are more right than others, but no one is completely right. And you see when it switches to Egwene's point of view from like 621 to 625 ish, when Egwene is taking control and she's fighting back. It's the the difference between Sawan's downfall and Egwene's potential downfall here is that one of the things we gripe about Egwene is that she has been humbled, but you pretty much never see her display any humility. But she has been humbled first by the Sanshin, by the collar, which really scarred her and shaped her, and then by the Aiel and having to on the fly very quickly pick up their way of doing things as one of their apprentices when grew up in a very very different culture. And so she's been taught, and she's had to learn very hard lessons. So she's able to not just quickly evaluate, but then take action and take good action of getting together these novices, and I'm going to teach you. I am on the fly here in 5 minutes going to teach you how we're going to survive. And it's contrasted sharply throughout this whole raid on the White Tower when we actually see what the Tower Aes Sedai are doing, and they're all very bureaucratic. Um,
Almost like something we railed on in other episodes.
yep, almost like um 628 is when um is that where it's at? Yeah. So here, yeah, here it is. Okay. Um, so Brian says, "All right, fine, I'll go with you, but I have two conditions, and one of them is that you bond me your warder." And then after the bonding, um, he says, "Would that I could give this to each man in my army." Sawad sniffed. "I highly doubt that their wives and families would approve of that. They would if it kept the soldiers alive," Brian said. "I could run 1,000 leagues and never want for breath. I could stand against 100 foes at once and laugh at them all." She rolled her eyes. Men! She had given him a deeply personal and emotional connection to another person, the likes of which even husbands and wives would never know. And all he could think about was how much better he might have become at swordplay.
Well, he could try the husband and wife swordplay later.
All right.
All right.
But that's exactly why the whole system works, because that is what he thinks about, and you're not. But you need someone to be thinking about that. It's why the one scene that stands out in the stupid series was the one that Sanderson pushed for of, hey, you need to do this. The into the first or second episode, whenever it is that the Trollocs attack, and Moiraine is flinging the fireballs, and anyone that gets in close, any Trolloc that gets in close, lands lopping their heads off. You need them both. You need them both working as a unit, complementing each other. And that's why I love that moment, because it is, yes, it is very Swan, but it is also very human, and not seeing the whole reason the system works in the first place. And let's now cancel us again for daring to say that. Um, so speaking of bureaucratic, when we switch back to Egwene's point of view at the end of this chapter, um, or it's not her point of view actually. It's um we see Egwene. I like that we see Egwene, but we see it from the point of view of Adalorna, who is the head of the Greens, and she's running for her life, gets saved by Egwene, and then decides, "Okay, child, off with you now. You were just 2 seconds ago in a panic and royally screwed, and she just saved your life." And I love the way Egwene just immediately takes charge, and you see how and why it works, because this is someone who is, whether she admits it consciously or not, is desperately in need of a firm hand, especially at this moment. I think thanks to things like uh Pirates of the Caribbean, and probably even more so. Did you ever watch Black Sails? I watched the first season of it because it
No, I
was
did
on.
not. No.
I think it was on Prime at one point, mostly just because they wanted to get you to buy a Stars package to add on to it. But I watched the first season, and so a lot of people now know that pirate ships were actually very democratic, and it was hard for the captain to get you to do anything unless he was very convincing and really inspired a lot of loyalty, except when you went into battle. And then his word was law at penalty of death because it had to be. One of my favorite, most underrated movies that unfortunately did not do well at the box office, Master and Commander. That's the whole point of Russell Crowe's character, and he butts head with the doctor, who's you know, uh, an early humanist, naturalist, scientist who can't stand this, you know, authoritarianism. And Russell Crowe's point is there has to be, because we are 180 men on a 90-foot long boat 2,000 miles away from home, and nature itself is trying to kill us. Someone has to be in charge. There has to be one voice in times like this. And uh this is actually I think one of the better scenes in this whole climax is these couple of pages here. It's still wordier than I think Jordan would have done it, but it is it is fairly concise and action oriented and gets to the point. And I think a big part of the point is the very end of the chapter where uh Egwene tells her, Egwene blasts a Togrukan out of the sky, and yeah, I know there may have been captives on that. Better off that they're dead. And she says, this is just a raid. They'll want to grab as many channelers as possible and be off with them. I intend to see that they lose more Domine than they gain Aes Sedai, which is a hard thing to say. And I have to think that there's a connection there to just the previous chapter with Varen
Hmm.
and whatever it takes in times of great peril. And then you'll just have to figure out how to live with yourself after the fact. Um, so there's another great line here in the next chapter, chapter 41, that jumps out at me because of how Queen Bee Egwene is about to get in the last few chapters of the book. Um, and this is from Gawain's point of view as they're infiltrating the tower. And it's on page 637. As they approached the tower grounds, they entered the nightmare. Great line that puts you right in the frame of mind. And this is someone who has been engaged. This is someone who was at Dumai's Wells, right? This is someone who has been playing this cat and mouse game with Brine in these guerrilla attacks and raids, and he's looking at this and thinking this is a nightmare. So hey, Egwene, how about you cut these people some slack because of what they went through to get to you?
Hmm.
Because they walk out, they see this horrific, mind-bending landscape, something out of a Gleeman's Tale come to life, and they still go forward. They still go towards the sounds of gunfire and screaming, not away from it. Um, and here's another great line that jumps out on page 642, and I think this goes to your point about um about the way Sanderson frames Egwene, but then the dialogue doesn't add up. uh with the way she interacts, especially with Sawan and Galwin. Um, and this is she's standing at this opening, just blasting Sanshin out of the sky. Um, and uh, well, it actually starts on the previous. Her anger was not out of control; it was cold and distilled. Um, blah 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 blah. And then where is it? Instead, she directed her anger, the anger of justice, the wrath of the Emerillin, and then she starts blasting Torakin after Torakin out of the air. I love that line because anger, like violence, is a tool. Now, more often than not, it is a tool used for negative ends, negative aims, but it is a tool. And she's not wrong here to be full of righteous fury and indignation. Not just because these enemies who she already hates for collaring her, are attacking the thing that she loves and wants to protect. Um, but then also, as she thinks, she foretold this. She dreamed this and she told people about it and told them to be ready, and no one believed her and no one did anything about it. And now everything is burning and in chaos and people are suffering. So she is not wrong to be angry here and now.
Well, I think there's an element to it that that Jordan wrote well with Rand a lot earlier in the books, but that did not happen here, but I think it was intended. She's wielding a very powerful sangreal
Mm-hmm.
right now, and the power is flowing through her, and that's influencing her thoughts. We
Hmm.
see that with Rand when he's using the statue at times where he's just I can control the world, I can destroy the world, I can save the world, and he starts doing things irrationally. You see that that is happening here only because you know it's happened before. It's not well written.
Hmm.
He just kind of says it's happening and then goes into her thoughts. Whereas he could have spent a little time
So
on
you don't think
her.
she's actually in as much control as she is thinking she is?
No, she's not. She is drunk with power. I compared in our very first reread episode that the power was in a very parallel to addiction itself. And she is drunk with power right now.
Well, that's a good way to frame it, because what happens here at the end of this chapter, she gets so drunk she passes out.
Hmm.
In fact, she thinks that the novices and accepted that were in the circle she was leading literally couldn't stand up. They had to be carried off once she released the circle. And another point that I thought of, that I don't think I've had this thought before here. So page 651 is when the raid is finally ending and she's being carried off. Okay. And she realizes in her, you know, overly drunk, about to pass out stupor, wait, it's Gawain. This is a pleasant dream. Wait, this isn't a dream. Wait, don't take me away. And it dawned on me, she's a dreamer. Dreamers are supposed to have absolute control over their ability to go to sleep or not. That's something that's well established in Fires of Heaven, or in Shadow Rising, even before that, when she starts to train. That, you know, and she can like half, there's a point where she's half asleep in the saddle so that she can dream to talk to someone, right? You are so overused that you're falling asleep, which should be next to impossible for you as a dreamer.
Well, when there were times when she was with the dreamers that they actually made her stop and made themselves stop because they said there's limits to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Exactly.
and but also we see that earlier in this the chapter before this where she takes the fork route and she's like, I hope it's not enough to make me pass out.
Mm-hmm.
So there are things that could influence your sleep.
But and that's my point, though. is that that is how overtaxed she is. And Godwin's right. Okay, yes, he doesn't know that you sent everyone off to take care of everyone else, but they just left you here alone. You don't know for sure that they're all gone. There could still be Sanshin roaming the halls, and you can't even talk, let alone defend yourself. So cut these guys some slack here in a couple of chapters when you start being a queen bee, because they came upon you lying on a pile of rubble while the tower is literally burning, and you are so overtaxed you can't even speak. They aren't wrong to pick you up and carry you off.
Yeah, it makes me think of PCP because PCP is, for those that aren't familiar with it, is a drug that basically fires up your system. Your noradrenaline, your norepinephrine is through the roof. So you're as strong as the muscle fibers in your body can perform at their own detriment. You can pick up a car, but you would pop every tendon in your body.
Mm.
But but it also makes you want to do that. You're on this drug that
Mm.
it's not something you can just channel is a good word. It's not something you can just channel and be like, okay, I'm a firefighter and I'm gonna hit some PCP before I go into this burning building and I'm gonna pull everybody out. Nope. You're gonna feel great and start flipping cars and kicking fire hydrants over, and it's that you're just gonna take it out on the closest thing nearest to you because that's what you feel like. She kind of got in that mode. She was soaking in all that power. Her
Mm-hmm.
norepinephrine was through the roof. She's blowing up toe rocking. She is just going. And I can't take it anymore. I'm just gonna hit everything. Oh, I'm dead. I'm done.
Right.
Every mental tendon in my body just popped.
But now jump to chapter 43. So we're skipping over Rand's chapter there. And she is sitting in her tent by herself thinking. She sat quietly in her tent, hands on her lap. She controlled her shock, her burning anger, and her incredulity. So when I got back from my walk and I read that sentence, that's when it suddenly hit me. Oh, this is why the Sanderson chapters don't the ends of these three books don't land quite the same as with the Jordan ones, because he's telling us too much. So he tells us this, but then he either doesn't show it or he shows us something different, is what we're going to see here. Because in her mind, she's saying all the right things. She's thinking all the right thoughts. She's being the Egwene that we saw kind of take control in uh where was it? I guess it's Path of Daggers, when they have the meeting out on the ice and she manipulates the hall into declaring war on Elida so that she can take firm control and stop, moving in the shadows and being a puppet. So that Egwene is uh decisive and intelligent and makes good moves and good decisions. And we see that when we're in her head, but then every time she opens her mouth, she becomes Miss Queen Bee and you stop liking her. And it contradicts what she was just thinking. And this is where the Egwene arc kind of starts to unravel a bit, because you've had all this great buildup here of her being heroic while she was captured, while she was a captive in the tower, and now all of a sudden she's treating her closest confidants, Swan especially. Godwin is different because, well, he's kind of retarded. So he more deserves what she gives him. Um, and that's a whole nother kettle of fish that doesn't smell right. Swan, on the other hand, she thinks many times that thank you, Sawan, for the lessons. How many times did she think that while she was a captive in the tower, and the way she was able to deal with and manipulate the Aes Sedai, even sitters, even heads of a jaw. And she thinks, thank you, Sawan, for your lessons. And so the way she treats Sawan is really what sticks in my craw, because not only is it clearly not deserved, but it dawned on me as I was rereading now that, oh, it's also because it's directly contradicting what you yourself are thinking and doing, except when you it it made me think. What I ultimately kind of came to the conclusion of was, I think there must have been something in the notes about how this action created a schism or a rift or a strain on Egwene's and Sawan's relationship, that had, just a few chapters earlier, she was thinking how this had become a friendship. And so it made me think there must have been something in the notes about this action straining that friendship, but not enough to instruct Sanderson how to actually do it. And he just completely fumbled it. Because so much of what she says directly to Sawan is just completely contradictory to what she, like. So here on, where is it, six, yeah, so she herself is thinking, uh it was a failure, yet it had been forced on her by others, but those others were her followers and friends. They would know her anger for their part in this fiasco, but first she needed to look inward to judge what she should have done better. So in this introspection, she is thinking, I too have made some mistakes. There are plenty of mistakes to go around. And it's one of the great moments of Egwene's triumph in the end, when she finally reunites the tower, is by pointing out, here in a couple of chapters, when she's raised, Sawan is arguing that she's already been raised, she doesn't need to, and Egwene stops her and says, no, the Saladar Aes Sedai raised me. The Tower Sisters deserve the opportunity to raise me as well. And that interaction with Sawan is so much different than the other interactions, and it makes perfect sense. It's Egwene being who she is, and then pointing out, yeah, you had good reason to rebel, but you still rebelled. There need to be apologies all around. We can't come marching in here triumphantly like we just won. No, this was a tragedy. No one made good decisions that day when the tower fell, and now we all need to apologize to each other and put this back together.
But to rewind to the snootiness of Egwene on being rescued, Swan made a promise to her that if you're about to die, I'm going to save you.
Mm-hmm.
She fulfilled that promise.
Mm-hmm.
The tower was being attacked by Shanshan. That's as good as Elida executing her. With a lot more warning, by the way. You
Mm-hmm.
can actually see the toe rocket attacking the tower.
Well, I skipped over that. That was a good point, because in Sawan's point of view, right after Egwene disappears, she thinks Egwene's a dreamer. She can very easily, like I was saying, go right back into the dream world. So if she got pulled out of the dream for something that wasn't an emergency, something that wasn't potentially dangerous, she could have popped right back in and said, "Don't worry, Sawan, it's nothing," or "Hold on, Sawan, I've got to go take care of this." The fact that Sawan thinks about the fact that she didn't come back was a big red flag to Sawan, because as a dreamer, she very easily and quickly could have done that. And Sawan, so that Sawan waited at least a little bit to see, is she coming back? No, okay, something's wrong here. And so there was that promise that, yeah, I'm going to protect you. And one of the glaring things that we'll get into more in the next book because it's to
You know,
me
you know, no,
it's kind
let
of a
me
plot
let me
hole.
let me bring something in here. Remember when we had that episode in our social episodes where I brought up all the people that were suing their rescuers from pulling them out of burning cars or stuff?
Yes.
That's what that reminds me of.
Yes. And something that seems like a glaring omission to me is why doesn't Gawain or Sawan or Brian point out, hey, it wasn't just the warriors and the Soldam, right? We killed an assassin who I would not have seen and been able to react to if I wasn't hadn't been bonded a warder. We kind of skipped over that part too. And that's going to come back up more later, but there's nothing to say that one of these assassins wouldn't have wandered by and said, "Oh, hey, cool, helpless Marath Domine stab." They don't know. You were left alone in a hallway, so no, they weren't wrong to come get you. Um, in one of my notes in here somewhere, I don't remember exactly where it hit me. It was here at the very end, but basically, what what I realized is that Sanderson nails the macro. So Egwene as the leader, Egwene as Amarillin, Egwene as the one who mends the tower. He nails that. That's all very good. He completely, but it's completely marred by how badly he messes up the micro interactions. Her interactions with Sawan primarily, but even some of the others that could have been a little bit better. Um, although her first interaction with Gawain is, I think, pretty good, and it is more deserved because of what she says to him when she finally um walks out of her tent and sees that Gawain is there, and 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 she tells him, you know, bluntly, "I'm not Amarillan to you, am I?" And that's the problem. Is you of all people, as someone who was raised to be the first prince, you of all people should understand what it's like that I have to be two people. Yes, I am Egwene the woman, and I have feelings for you. I'm also this station, this position, and that matters. And you of all people should understand that. And the fact that you can't or won't, the fact that you don't accept me, accept my position, and are only focusing on me, the helpless girl, that's causing me problems. And that is putting a rift between us. So that is actually deserved and is handled well because she's not. I feel it like in her interactions with Sawan, she is being unnecessarily cruel. She's not being cruel in that interaction with Gawain. She is just simply stating the facts that, and much more openly than maybe he necessarily deserves, considering her position and that they're standing out in the open. Of no, this is where we stand right now, and until we can get past this, we can't talk about what you want to talk about.
Yeah, that exchange is this. I mean, if Godwin was already annoying, the line that puts him way over the edge, 668, in that interaction you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
where she's like, "You can't believe I'm the Emerald," or "You don't think that you don't accept that I'm the Emerald." There were a lot different answers than "I can change." No woman actually wants to hear that. They all think in their head, "I can change him," but they want him to be the bad boy he is. He could have said something to the extent of, "Well, it was a shock." You have to admit you were as shocked when they raised you. You know,
I I think that's where the
I'm a few days old on this concept. You know, there's a lot more different ways you can say that than "I can change. Please let me change for you."
we have used this word before. And this is again, I think this may be a Sanderson problem. He's being a simp.
Yeah.
That is simping 101 right there.
Yeah, I can change, but you have to help me, which is basically just, please, mistress, tell me how to behave.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, I do like right after that though, there's an interesting scene where we see the heads of the Ajahs in the tower, and it's finally said outright what the fan speculation had been about, which was that the heads of the Ajahs were trying to manipulate things, and they failed miserably. The main thing I like about that scene is that we've we've beat up on the Aes Sedai quite a bit and quite deservedly. I like this scene because it shows us they're not all bad and they're not all lost. The fact that they're able to, yes, after going round and round for a bit and trying to avoid the obvious, it's all right, we have failed and we need to move in a different direction because otherwise the whole tower is screwed. So the fact that they're able to recognize that and then do what needs to be done and push the tower sitters to accept Egwene is uh, a big gold star for them. For as much as we bitch about the Aes Sedai, they're not all completely awful. Um,
Yeah, I think the whole there, though, is that it makes it inconsistent.
mhm,
This one not as bad because they do admit to their folly, but at the same time, you look at all the interactions that were going on. Had there been this underground alliance that we see here, they would have already been making these distinctions a long time ago.
mhm. So jumping to now, let's take away the gold star because here's where we get Aes Sedai dumbness. Page 676, there's this great exchange between Sawan and Gareth. Um, Sawan grimace. Nobody likes being disobeyed, least of all the Emeraldin. I will pay for last night, Brian. You're right that it probably won't be in a public way, but I worry that I've lost the girl's trust. And was it worth the cost? Yes, Sawan said. She didn't realize how close this band was to slipping away from her, and we couldn't know that she'd be safe within the tower during the attack. If there's one thing my time in the White Tower taught me, it's that there is a time for gathering and planning, but one also has to act. You can't always wait for certainty. And not only do I love that moment because it's a great Sawan moment and Sawan and Gareth together in that interaction, but then Egwene does that. Her thinking leads her to realize, as much as I don't want to, right now the tower is weak, the sisters are drained. If we're ever going to attack, it has to be now. She's proving Sawan right when she decides, tell everyone to get ready, we're going to attack. And doubly so because while she's telling the soldiers to get ready to attack, she's secretly beheading 50 Black Ajah, which, yikes. You go, girl. So, and that's why it is so frustrating. Where is it? Um, jump to page 708. Okay, after uh all of this is going on, she's dealt with the hall, she's dealt with the Black Ajah thing, and now it's time to get ready to go attack. Um, and she comes up to Sawan and Brine, and immediately just goes right into queen bee mode. I don't understand what was in Sanderson's head when he wrote this interaction, because it it completely undercuts all the goodwill that has been built up for Egwene over all these books and chapters. You know, primarily from her captivity in the White Tower up to this moment here. Is Do your best to keep her out of trouble, General Egwene said, staring Swan in the eyes. She has been in quite a bit of it lately. I have half a mind to give her to you to use as a foot soldier. I believe that the military organization might be good for her, and remind her that sometimes obedience overrides initiative. Sawan wilted, glancing away. I haven't decided what to do with you yet, Sawan, Egwene said in a softer voice, but my anger has been kindled and my trust has been lost. You will need to soothe the first and stoke the second if you wish to enter my confidence again. She gave more and a better explanation to Gawain, who she barely knows compared to Sawan. Sawan has been at her side since Saladar, advising her and being her close confidant, being her most loyal follower for months. She only canoodled with Gawain for a few weeks, and she gave him more courtesy than she gave Sawan here. And then you compound that. And again, this is where I think, was there something in the notes and Sanderson didn't know how to portray it? Because now jump forward a couple of pages to page 710, and we're back to the macro. We're back to Egwene as the Amarillion. Well, what Sawan did essentially was what she was telling Brine a few pages ago. There is, look, there's a time for planning, but then there comes a point where it's nut cutting time. Those weren't her words. That would be, what my dad would say. But you get it. At some point, you got to do, and that's what she did. Her instincts told her Egwene is in danger, and we need to go in there and help her. Well, what happens here at the bridge? Egwene's instincts tell her, wait, something's off. We don't have all the information. Something's a little weird. Let's wait until the last possible moment before I give the order to attack. So she herself is acting on instinct. And we've talked about this before about um what's the technical mumbo jumbo you talk about of, you don't have to see all the details to know, oh crap, there's a lion in the bush, jump out of the way. That's essentially what instinct is. It's all this stuff that's going on in the back of your head at a subconscious level.
Well, I mean, when we've talked about it, the it's uh it's a negativity bias. Whereas things happen that could be a lion in the bush, so you still treat it as one. And that's more survive that helps you survive better than being trying to be perfectly right all the time. But are you talking about her interaction with Sheriam, or are we not there yet?
Oh no, I jumped past that. Did you
Oh,
want to
you
deal
jumped.
with
No,
that?
oh, no, 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 no. Okay, so I thought that's what you were talking about with the way you were going with that, but
No, I
she, she
just
just seemed to have
overall,
an instinct to
I
basically
think
go,
I think that was more plan of how she planned to go in there and um reveal Sheriam and Moria as Black Ajah. And as she says to Lelaine and Ramonda, why did you do it that way? Well, if I would have just given you accusations without proof, what would you have done? I made them reveal themselves. That was good planning and execution on her part. Then when she goes to the bridges to give the order for Brian to begin the attack, she has this gut feeling that she should wait. And she doesn't know why. She can't explain it. She just asks, Brian, what is the absolute latest? And he says, I can wait an hour and then I'm going to lose daylight. And she says, then we wait an hour. And it's because she waits that hour that the Tower sisters finally come out and say, the hall has met and we are raising. Um, and then again, it gets ruined though, because she has this finally, this is the ultimate victory. It's what she thought she had lost by being taken out of the tower. And now it's here it is. A peaceful resolution. But then on the very last page of the chapter, she goes back into Queen Bee mode dealing with Swan. Mother Swan said cautiously, this might be rash. Perhaps you should speak with. It's not rash. Egwene released her weave and felt a surge of hope. It's what we've wanted. She eyed Swan. Besides, who are you to lecture me on being rash? Why wasn't that a. She could have still said that, but then instead of turning to Brian and saying, General, prepare your troops, said something along the lines of, you know, maybe I was too hard on you. Looks like your actions didn't cost us something to indicate some degree of human to human empathy and sympathy and connection and emotion.
Yeah. But that's why we all hated Wayne. I've got some
Yeah.
memes for the very end of this book that I think Scott will love.
Yeah. And so the last chapter we're going to talk about, chapter 46. This is where um this interaction is actually better, and it just makes me wonder what is it about the interpersonal that he fumbles so badly, those kind of quiet friendship moments between Egwene and Sawan that are so bad, because the first couple of pages of the very next chapter, after she was just massive bitch to her closest confidant and most faithful follower among the Aes Sedai, and then she turns right around and no, this is actually a good interaction. She's actually explaining, not berating to Sawan, because Sawan is kind of right, especially in her position, to be incredulous to accept their apology. They rebelled against the tower, Sawan's Egwene said, looking at her. Whatever the need for what they did, there is reason for apology. But you were with them. I no longer represent just them, Sawan, Egwene said firmly. I represent the tower, the entire tower. And the tower needs to know that the rebels regret the division. They needn't lie and say that they wish they had stayed, but I think it is appropriate for them to express sorrow over the hardships the division caused. I will acquit them and we can get on with the healing.
Are we missing something that Sanderson might have been trying to do here, but he didn't pull off? Egwene is telling Swan that all will be good if you apologize to me. You did the thing that you thought you needed to do that I didn't like. Maybe we should start with an apology.
Maybe, maybe
But
there's
it didn't
something I'm
hit.
forgetting about in
The
the next
that
book, but
yeah, that one hit the dirt
ugh,
before the
yeah,
glove. Yeah.
yeah. Um, let's see. All right, page 720. As she's being raised in the tower, um, there's this great interaction between Saren and her as Saren is putting on the Emerald stole. Are you certain you want to bear this weight, child? Saren asked in a very soft voice. This was not part of the ceremony. I bear it already, Saren. Egwene's reply was almost a whisper. Elida cast it aside when she tried to slice it and divide it as she wished. I took it up and have carried it since. I would bear it to my death, and I will. Sarah nodded. I think that might be why you deserve it, she said. I doubt anything in the histories when compared to the days ahead. I suspect that in the future, scholars will look back on our days and judge them to be more difficult, more trying of mind, body, and soul than the time of madness or the breaking itself. And again, this is Sanderson nailing the macro, but he keeps screwing up the micro. Is this is why she's a heroic character. But up until just a few seconds ago, she was also like that with her close confidants. She was also like that on the personal level. You know, some of the scenes I think of, there are a few times I remember, some scenes where in where Jordan had Egwene, you know, call out Sawan, like, harshly take her to task. And a couple in particular, and she would put on the stole, and then Swan would, sorry, mother, you're right. I lost my temper, whatever. And then she, Gwen would put the stole back over the chair, and it's okay. Let's be friends again. Let's go back to where we were a second ago. And to your point, maybe that's what Sanderson was trying to do here, and he just never got the ball to the glove. Um,
Let me.
I think one of the reasons that Egwene's treatment of Sawan is so glaring is because her treatment of Sylviana is so awesome. When she has her brought in, and everyone thinks, "Oh, is this really the time to dispense justice?" And she calls out the hall that just raised her to the Amarillan of, all of you stood by when Elida did this, and then she did this, and then she did this, and none of you stood up to her publicly. To your credit, I know that some of you were working behind the scenes. Fine. But only one person dared defy Elida to her face, and that was this woman here. I'm not here to punish her. I didn't bring her here to punish her. I brought her here to ask her to be my keeper of the chronicles because she's the only one of you with balls. The fact that she would treat Sylviana that way, and there really is a parallel there to Sawan, of Sawan going to putting herself in great personal peril to do what she thought was the right thing, even knowing that there would be negative ramifications for it. And again, maybe there's something in the next book I'm forgetting, and that's one of the things I'm going to be keeping an eye out for, but I don't ever remember that really being resolved, that rift being healed.
Yeah, the speech itself didn't really land home. Uh, Sanderson shouldn't become a political speechwriter at any time, I don't think.
Are you talking about the very end speech where Egwene goes out before the whole tower after the rebel
No, no, no.
sisters
The
have come
the
in?
speech that you were referencing, where she's saying
Oh,
shame, shame, shame on you, all you. Yeah, the
yeah.
overall concept of it was good, but I think it was a little.
Both it and the one that happens a couple pages later at the end before everyone. It's again, he's being overly wordy. He could have been more concise, and it would have hit home better.
Yeah, and sometimes you see this in cinema, and I feel bad for the writers that have to do this. It's supposed to be the momentous speech
Hmm.
of the movie, or the politician gets in front of the crowd and makes his, and it's like, okay, the moment has this power, but the speech really didn't get me. So it's I know it's a big task, but it just didn't hit home for me. It was like shame, shame, shame on all you. I don't know. I think that speech could have been a little bit better delivered. But the overall premise, I think you're right. Yes. There was a little what a twist that she's the person that slapped her with her slipper for so long and
Hmm.
now she's the keeper. But it also really wasn't a twist with the where we started this when she gets out of the dungeon and they say, "Oh, well this is happening to Sylviana," and
Hmm.
it's yeah, it's not that big of a surprise. You know, you maybe at least you're expecting a pardon there. You know, read back to the Mistress of Novices, but I don't think you're the keeper was a big surprise.
Hmm.
Especially since we just got rid of the last keeper because he's a dark friend. Dun dun dun.
Oh, we not have any comments?
No, we didn't have any
Oh,
comments.
okay. Well, never mind then. I was pulling up comments. So looks like uh there's nothing left to discuss then. I didn't have any spoilery I thoughts. I don't think either of us did.
I think I have just one more comment on Varen. The thing I liked the way she ended. That was great from okay, so we've complained about in other shows about stories within the stories being better than the overall story. That was a story within a story that was good. But here's the problem with the overall story. It basically makes meaningless the whole hunt for the Black Ajah story that we've had for 3 books. Because it's like we're finding this one at a time, one at a time, one at a time. Someone comes in with all of them.
That's a good point because and that is a big chunk of time in cross that is like the entire prologue of Crossroads, I think. I think it was
Hmm.
where there's this huge chunk and then you don't see it again, but then there's a lot of it in Knife of Dreams and all of that comes to nothing. I hadn't thought about that Jordan spent a lot of time on that group in the tower who were accidentally looking for the Black Ajah, um, to have it go absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, and to feed in the people, one of the few complaints about Jordan himself, not just Sanderson, is all of these characters that we have to keep track of and everything. It just made like what 12 12 random Aes Sedai that we had to learn their names and they all sound the same to that are kind of a
Mhm.
meaningless chunk of our mind space at the time.
I really think it almost seems like the entire point of that subplot was to introduce us to Pavara because she's going to be important in the last two books, and
Have an
for
avenue for Egwene to work through a little
yeah,
bit.
exactly, for
Yeah.
Egwene to find them and find some allies within the tower, find common cause, with some of the more important people within the tower.
But it also took away from some little mini plots with Egwene because her little the threat of calling her a dark friend from Elida and putting it before that the sitters w- never would have worked because one of the sitters that was with her when she was down there with the oath rod would have to stand up and say, and she should know that.
Hmm.
She should know I just took an oath in front of the sitters and they know I'm not a dark friend, so they would have
Hmm.
to speak up in my favor.
Yeah, yeah,
It,
it is.
it's
It is
it's
a bit of a.
yeah,
Wait a
yeah,
minute.
they're treating it like a threat, and I'm like, it's not a threat at all. And Egwene should know that.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, that's a bit of a long episode, but we tore through a bunch of chapters there. So the next one should be a lot quicker because I think it's 3 chapters and then maybe a little bit of the epilogue of Rand doing his Rand thing. It's 3 or 4 chapters. I'm curious what your thoughts on it are going to be. And I suspect a lot of it is going to be, yeah, I see what was going on here, but it just didn't quite land for me.
Uh, I think it's funny that our climax giggity is Egwene and Rand, and they both actually make a very male and female climactic moment in that giggity sense because she's going and going and going, and Harry met Sally for the end, and then he's like, and then happy sleepy time now.
I hadn't
Mm.
even thought of that. Leave it to you
And
to.
the world is right, and apples, and yes, it's so nice.
Oh, geez. You're right. Because it all kind of just a few pages, and then it's, oh yeah, I'm done
Built
being
up
bad.
tension, built up tension, built up tension. Oh
Because that
yes,
was
now
one,
world is
two,
nice.
three, 4, 5, 6, 7 chapters. That was 7 chapters of Egwene's
Multiple orgasms.
multiple. Yeah, because that was pretty much all of those 7 chapters was the raid on the White Tower. So it all kind of built and up and down and up and down and built to the end there, and then Rance is just and okay, let's go take a nap. I'm hungry. Let's go down and eat some apples. Oh boy. All right. Well, one more reason for us to be canceled, and we'll get to that next week.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to ruin that for everybody or make it great. I did wear this for Egwene because if we do have any female fans in the audience, I take emails. Uh,
Slide into my DMs.
we'll see you next time. No social episode this week, which kind of needed a break, though. There's a lot of news.
Mm,
Uh, we'll figure it
yeah,
out.
it was not a good week and a short week because of a holiday weekend. So we'll see how deep and dark of a rabbit hole we go down next week before we very quickly get to Rand's climax.
All right, guys, we'll see you next time.